Sure.
In your way, Robert.
No, not in my way.
The Elsica Heritage Action Zone started in 2017 and it's a partnership project with Historic England to look at Elsica and the wider industrial landscape and really understand the significance of that landscape, the history and the archaeology, and look at what survives and how important that is. So one of the things that they looked at was the ironworks. So there were two ironworks in Elsica. There was the Elsica Ironworks that was established first, and the Milton Ironworks, which was established a few years later. In terms of the Milton Ironworks, we sort of looked at the site and realised that actually the site of the ironworks is now a recreation field without any development on it. So we were quite excited to see whether any of the ironworks survives underground. At Elsica, there's quite a lot of upstanding remains. At Milton, we've got the furnace ponds, and then we've got the field, and there isn't a lot else sort of directly from the ironworks that you can see. So Historic England came in with the Limfords and brought in their geophysics team, essentially, and spent a good few days doing geophysics on the field. We looked at, I think we did ground penetrating radar and magnetometry, and that picked up some really interesting stuff. There's a bank in the middle of the field, and there was some really strong magnetometry results from that bank. So we decided that we'd put some trenches in. So when the Great Place project kind of was looking for archaeological sites, it seemed like the perfect kind of joint project really. From a HAZ point of view as well, it's really important to understand what remains, if it remains, what state it's in and how we protect it in future.
So Great Place, Wentworth and Elsica and the Heritage Action Zone have come together to put on an excavation up on Milton Forge fields. We've commissioned Arc Heritage to come along and be our archaeologists on site, and we're looking for the remains of the Milton Ironworks. So the Milton Ironworks was here between 1790 and up until the 1880s. The land here was owned by the Fitzwilliams of Wentworth Woodhouse, and the land was leased to the Walker brothers of Rotherham. The Walkers family lived at Clifton Park Museum in Rotherham, and there were quite big deals in the ironworking industry.
It's important to communities to involve them in these sorts of projects because there's nothing else quite like this. History is very important and people can read about it as much as they like. People can visit National Trust sites, they can visit English heritage sites, but those are ruins that have been tidied up one way or another. I've been saying to people every day when they come here, this isn't put on for entertainment purposes, this isn't a confection, it's not a simulation. This is a genuine live archaeological dig, which gets me off the hook a lot because I don't have all the answers yet. So I finally get to say to people, this is a working interpretation that you're all involved in. It's a big communal effort.
As far as we know, we didn't know there was any pictures in existence, but this gentleman brought this picture down, showed it to us. It's going to let us take copies of the image, and hopefully this is going to add to our knowledge for the future when we start looking back and interpreting the site.
Here's a picture of the inside of Milton Ironworks. And Mr. Dawes, he made these little engines to run around work. At first we didn't think it was Milton because we thought this was an overhead crane, but it's not, it's part of the building. He blew Ironworks up, to tell you the truth, because he had an argument with Fitzwilliam, and he blew it up. He said he was going to do, and he did do. But he went to Scunthorpe after this and started the big ironworks at Scunthorpe, what's still there today. He started that. This gun come from a good friend of mine when he died, and it's either Elsica or Milton Ironworks top. And I think it's very good because it's so atmospheric. It shows it how it used to be, dirty and cluttered.
This trench that we're sat in now is a proper pucker little trench. It's thrown into sharp relief because of the two other trenches we excavated where we found almost literally nothing. We've assessed that there's a lot of Victorian tipping and 20th century tipping that happened on this site, which may mean that there's some archaeology buried way down, but we can't get to it this time round. Whereas over here, we've got a little island of preservation. And very rarely actually for industrial archaeology, what it seems to be is quite an early phase of the Milton works preserved here. So that's fascinating for us as archaeologists, but also as community archaeologists, because we get to demystify that process.
So I mentioned the Belmont Club earlier, and this is the piece of pottery that we found, which says it says AND Town on it, Belmont Club. We think that's Hoyland Town Belmont Club. It's got a date, commemorative date on the bottom. It can't quite make out what it is. We think it's probably part of a cup commemorating an event there or something like that. This is quite nice. We found 2 coins on site. This is one of them. This is a halfpenny from 1965, so it's not actually that old, but it's very, very nice. You can see the ship on it, and then on the other side you can see the Queen's head. So it's quite a nice find.
These projects are such a brilliant engagement tool. We're very fortunate as commercial archaeologists. Usually when we go to a site, we're fenced off away from the public on building sites. This is the exact opposite of that. So we feel a great privilege because we can take our years of experience in archaeology and then use that as a tool to engage people. What's really special about this project is we haven't had to force people into it. We've not had to hook people in off the street and convince them that they need to be here. If anything, I think we've probably had to turn people away because there's just this wonderful groundswell of community support. So we have the community and we have the archaeology, and we get to just interweave them together to work on this wonderful project.
It's very unusual to have artists in residence on sites like this. As far as I know, we don't really get artists on community excavations, so it's something a bit different and unusual. We've had 3 artists over the last week and a half so far. I believe they're interested in the history. They're going to create creative responses using creative writing, using imagery, using sound, to create something that kind of is very unique to the excavation. It's something that's going to produce some really interesting results, and it'll be something that we can use in the future to sort of promote Milton and its heritage and how we used art to sort of create something special.
I've recorded some sounds today of people working, digging up bits, scraping, rubbing, generally kind of just working in the ground. My intention is to either use those sounds as they are, recreate those sounds, or find a way to have those sounds represented or influenced through musical instruments. So I'll be using these sounds in some way to compose a piece of music or a soundscape. One of the things that really interests me about archaeology though with sound is strata, layering, and structuring. So I'm hoping to try and get hold of the geophysics data and use that as an actual structure for a soundscape or a piece, which I can then layer either musical instrument sounds on top of with actual physical sounds. So we have an underlayer that isn't heard but is represented as structure, which is the physical space under the ground, and the sounds of that being uncovered as a more tangible way to find that structure, which is, I think, represented by what we're doing here.
So we had the school children in, and they were reflecting on what they'd found within the archaeological dig, so some of the actual finds. What we were also doing is we were looking at old newspaper articles from the time. There was one about a robbery, and there was also a quote about the horizon of the ironworks. And so what we did with the children is we did some blackout poetry, so they could produce their own pieces from that. So blackout poetry is taking some text that already exists and taking out the words that you wouldn't necessarily consider poetic, like and the, and just keeping in the really poetic stuff, and it worked really well. They really enjoyed it. It took them away from what they'd ordinarily be doing, so it was good for them, and a lot of them found that they actually were quite into poetry when they didn't realise that they were. Poetry can allow people to express themselves in a different way. It's an art form. It also captures history, family history and legacy of area.